The art of mime, what is it? Why is it basic to the other creative arts? How can it help one discover his or her own unique center? There is far more to the study of mime than is generally realized by the casual observer.
Hello, I'm Dr. Reid Gilbert. Several years ago, I studied mime with Etienne de Croul, whom most people regard as the father of modern mime. In this videotape, I'll be covering the aforementioned questions, as well as other topics relating to the art of mime. Join me as we explore the basic principles of corporeal mime, illusion pantomime, body wisdom, body language, circus techniques, mask, dance, and other related arts.
Mime? What is it? Well, first you must consider it the most basic form of all communication. It is body language. It telegraphs ideas, warnings, attitudes, feelings from person to person without the burden and inaccuracies of words. Before verbal language, in mankind's distant history, it was the oldest of the performing arts. It recreated the story of the hunt or the escape from danger so that others could share an experience they had not lived. Today, we can best describe mime as gestural theater. It is not acting, which is too often preoccupied with intellectual concepts, expressed in words and supported by physical actions. It is not dance, which designs music into movements that interpret a theme. Mime might be described as a bridge between acting and dance. But in truth, mime is mime, an art form in its own right.
Mime simplifies and defines the very essence of character and of situation. It is an art that recreates the world. It transposes one reality into another.
But to do this, a mimer must first find the creative center within himself. The shadow must be just as real as the rose, or the absence of a rose. The mime must develop a keen awareness of the senses of listening, seeing, touching. His or her own observation powers must be heightened. And this soon leads to a greater understanding of oneself. Only when one understands oneself can he or she interpret the character of another. The art of mime may be divided into three general types. They are: 1, illusion pantomime. This is the type of mime most generally known and seen as with Marcel Marceau. The mime is usually white-faced, and his or her mission is to tell a story with creative, physical movement. The second type is called corporeal mime. This form is more closely related to the dance, for it creates abstract, geometrical designed movements. It tells no story, but communicates a mood. The third kind of mime is mask. In this form, the mask creates the theme which the body of the mime interprets. Mummenschanz is the best example of this style of mime. In all forms of mime, the artist must first learn the basics of creative movement. All interpretive movement moves out from one's center, located where the rhythms of breathing and circulation are, here at the heart. Let us isolate the movements of the parts. First, the head and neck. Notice how the head and neck can move independently from the trunk. These are the triple designs: the rotation, side inclination, forward and backward inclination, and when put together, they form a pattern called the triple design, which can be executed by all the parts of the body. And this is the translation or transstation. This is executed when one part of the body is transported by the parts underneath. In this instance, the neck is transporting the head. And here is an isolation of the arm. I may move the arms as a bird moves its wings, or I may simulate the movement of a seahorse's tail in 8 steps. Although this exercise is done in 8 steps, one may vary it by varying the pacing or the dynamics of tucking into place, or a slow motion in which one does not stop at each point. Hand isolations, too, are an important exercise. Each hand position has its own name. This is the bent hand, the palette, the trident, umbrella, salamander, marguerite, and they're all put together in a composite movement flowing from the center of the hand. The isolation of leg movements, too, is a key to controlled creative interpretation. The strength of the legs is extremely important as the body descends to the floor and then ascends as an elevator. These are some of the many isolation exercises the mime must master to develop control, flexibility, and strength, including both small and large movements. I will now demonstrate how the movements seen in isolation work together to create an illusion. Here is a mime event I call the wall. Here is another mime event that we shall call encounter, performed with masks. Notice that it is the body movement that tells the story. The expressions on the masks never change. They only seem to. How does a mime recreate a new and illusory world through pantomime? How does a mime create a physicalization of a character in a dramatic situation? Before anyone can become a mime artist, he or she must realize that mime is a craft before it is an art, that one must first master the basic principles before attempting to perform. As we review the arm exercises, notice that the movement is focused on the center of the arms, not on the extremity, just as we had earlier demonstrated that the hand isolations focus on the center of the hand, and as the body isolations focus on the center of the trunk. Everything flows from the center. Now notice how the centers, particularly the body center, is utilized in the demonstration sketch called chewing gum. In creating a character and a situation like this, your first basic awareness must be what happens to the total body. The basic principle of alignment begins with the spine, the center of the body, the zero position. Beginning with the head I'm straightening here, the alignment of the trunk must appear as if the body were suspended from a skyhook, straight. Now see what happens when I change this line to a concave curvature of the upper spine. Instantly the body character takes on a down feeling, a dejection, an attitude of failure. And see what happens when this is reversed, when the spine is released and extended. You'll remember that in the sketch I hyperextended my spine to create a haughty attitude for the sudden change to a contraction of my spine when I stepped on the chewing gum. Closely related to the principle of body alignment is the next basic set of principles of opposing forces. The first of these is energy and resistance. Changes in body alignment are the broadest signs of a character's attitude and emotional state of mind. This chair provides a resistance to the energy of my hand. Let's take the chair away, and the mime then must provide his own resistance. In mime, the performer must provide both the energy and the resistance because there is no real object. Here I provide the energies both to pull the gum and the resistance to keep it from being pulled. If the gum were real, I would not have to supply the resistance.
The opposing forces of energy and resistance are what provide drama, just as the antagonist and the protagonist do in a play.
Another category of opposing forces is the concept of positive and negative space. Positive space is that which is occupied by a principal object. Here are my hand and stomach. They represent two areas of positive space. When negative space is changed, or when the distance of the negative space is changed, the dramatic tension is altered. These bodies occupy positive space. The space between the bodies is called negative space. But look at the difference when I change the amount of negative space between the bodies. Something very dramatic occurs. The closer the bodies, the more congenial the relationship of the characters. The greater the negative space, perhaps a goodbye. The same principle applies to the individual parts of the mime's body. Each part, a hand, a head, a foot, each part is an actor to be considered as an individual occupying positive space. As the negative space between them changes, so does the dramatic action. Another correlative of opposing forces is to simplify and amplify. Too often, an inexperienced pantomimist will lose dramatic focus because of many undisciplined, random movements, gestures without clear meaning. The disciplined mime will simplify movement and give every gesture a precise meaning. This leads to the last of the four principles of opposing forces, the concept of movement and immobility. An actor in mime or in a stage play must realize that it's as important to play the immobility of a dramatic action, the same as with sound and silence or dark and light, all opposites of artistic contrast. Remember the moment of immobility in our gum sketch. The take. It may last a second or 5 seconds. Whatever the mime feels is correct. This moment of stillness is every bit as important as the movements that follow and precede it. Absent objects is the next major category in the mechanisms of mime techniques. It has two parts. The first is points in space. The key point in space of our sketch was the chewing gum on the sidewalk. But notice how this point in space changes as the sketch develops. Here I pull the point in space up with obvious purpose, not too quickly, for I must not confuse the audience. Now as the chewing gum moves to my hand, it becomes the point in space. The point in space changes to the other hand and so on, until it ends in the mouth. The second part of absent objects that a mime must be constantly aware of is what I term respect. The term has several meanings in mime technique. It is the respect for the shape and form of an absent object. In developing the respect for an absent object, the mime must look at it, feel it, hold it again and again, until he can recreate the form imaginatively, recalling fully, with dramatic respect, the form and shape of the object. When I duplicate the shape of this absent object, I must precisely remember the shape, the weight, and the feeling of the real object so that my audience can almost see it. It is the respectful awareness of absent objects, of opposing forces, of body alignment that permits a mime to create an illusion of reality. These are basic principles that must be foremost in your mind as you create a total physicalization of a character in a dramatic situation. Focus on them, develop them, use them, and you too can create physicalization of character in the make-believe theatrical world of mime. As you have seen, mime has many different styles. When one becomes a student of mime, one becomes a student of life. Mime has limitless possibilities of character, of situation, but in order to explore those, one must develop a very strong discipline. In fact, there's a kind of balance between the discipline, the technique, and celebration. And as we have seen in the tape, it is very important to center oneself physically. It is just as important to center emotionally. In fact, the mime artist might take a cue from the potter. The potter must center the clay in order to create the pot. The mime must do the same thing, must center oneself, one's energies, one's physicality, and one's emotions in order to create the character, in order to create the drama. Mime celebrates,